Bhavya, if you can put FGS next to your name, that would be great. And Bhavya will be hosting this meeting.
All right. All right, everyone, as we wait, it would be great if we could drop down where we're from and what grade you're in to kind of get to know each other, as well as, you know, we're all from different areas. It's really nice to kind of connect.
And I'll make Bhavya and Jennifer co-host right now. And I'll spotlight Jennifer for everyone. Wait, Bhavya, just checking. You can stop the recording, right? So the recording, you have the option to stop recording and finish.
Yes.
All right, perfect.
Also, yes, to answer your question, the meetings will be recorded. I'm pretty sure they should be uploaded to our YouTube. We will work on that.
Also, make sure to stay until the end of the meeting, so you can fill out the feedback form prompted by Zoom, and then we will track raffles, as well as like the overall feedback form at the end of the day, where we will track attendance to give you guys raffles.
Also, completely feel free to take pictures of the event and post it on our social media, hype it up for everyone. You can tag us, we'll end up reposting everyone else, and just make it a whole fun experience. The feedback forms will be given at the end of the meeting. Julia, there are a few questions in the chat asking if there was a feedback form for the previous event. Do you know of that?
Yes, I think so. Once we end the meeting, there should be one that pop up. Did it pop up? Can someone tell me their experience? Nope. Oh, it did for me. Yes. Yes, it did. Nope.
Okay.
Yes. No. Oh, that's really interesting. Okay, most people said yes, but we will have an overall feedback form later will be given out anyways. So that will be that.
All right, Julia, should I start?
Yeah, sure. I think
All right. Cool. All right. Hi, guys. My name is Jennifer. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen so we can look at a little PowerPoint together. So let me go ahead and get that going for everyone. Hope y'all are having a good day to first be getting to this lovely conference. So much stuff to cover. So today I will be talking about essays. Let me go ahead and hit play. Okay, who am I? Why should you be listening to me? So I've been working in college admissions for about, I don't know, 15 years. I started while at the University of Pennsylvania, which is my alma mater. And much like you guys, I'm a first generation student, low income. My mom's directly from Japan. Dad did not go to college. So, I feel like this is a topic I feel very strongly about, because I believe my essays are really what separated me from the bunch and got me into college, even though my test scores are probably on the lower end. And I went to a school where the average AP score was a 2. So, didn't have a lot going for me academically with the kind of school setting I went to. Maybe some of you guys can identify with that, where you're like, a little like shaking in your boots, like, how am I going to compete with students that are at these magnet schools and take like 9 APs and have like 8 5s, right? I'm sure some of you have been watching YouTube videos of like how I got accepted into MIT, and those students are crazy out of this world. But the good thing is there are definitely ways to establish yourself, and part of that comes with your essays. So I'm going to be talking about how to write these essays from the point of view that many of you are going to be relying heavily on these to share your story with the admissions committee and, really kind of establish yourself as someone that would be a great contribution to their campus. So a little bit more on my background. I have a track record. I've been doing full-time college admissions in the last few years, and I work with USC Bovard Scholars. And, between that and my private roles, I have a track record where nearly all of my students gain admissions to a top 20 school. And with Bovard Scholars, which are underrepresented students, many of them are going to school on full rides. Some of them are QuestBridge scholars, some of them just are low income, so they qualify for full grants. But yeah, I'm super proud to be a part of it. It's all, it's full credit to my students. I'm just here to kind of guide them along the way. So moving forward, other stuff about my background. So I have a teaching cert from Rutgers, my BA in Psych from Penn, and then I also taught K-5 special ed. So I've had a really kind of diverse experience in the education field. I worked in the admissions office at Penn. I used to run the Princeton Review Network of Southern Florida. So I have done a lot with test prep. So I could feel all of you guys and your pain with the SAT, ACT. As someone that wasn't the most phenomenal test taker and went on to teach SAT, ACT, and was kind of obsessed about it, I've kind of seen the full end of the stress that comes with it, but also like the fact that it is an exam that, you can kind of game with strategies, etc. Anyway, that's for a whole nother discussion. Luckily, we're not talking about test prep right now. I have graded over 100,000 essays, which is crazy, but it's something I'm super interested in. And I've done that both as like an admissions reader with USC Bovard Scholars. I work as their lead editor. I've also read a lot with when I was working at Penn, and then at the Princeton Review, I was a live grader analyst. And I also just do a lot of thesis and PhD paper research and editing. So it's pretty wild. Last thing, I work at the USC Pre-Med Academy as a curriculum developer. So if after this call you have some pre-med questions, you can feel free to ask me. I know almost too much about the MCAT and everything related to pre-med. All right. So agenda, what are we talking about? You just talked about a bunch of stuff that had nothing to do with essays. Well, here's where we're going to kind of like tame it back in. We're going to be first talking about how to think when writing an essay. I think a lot of students, when they write their essays, you're kind of thinking from the point of view as someone that's writing for a high school class. You're writing for maybe like a research paper for a push, or like in, you know, English comparative piece of The Great Gatsby or something else, right? And that's all like rubric writing. It's very different than the kind of creative writing that's supposed to show your personality, that kind of defies some of the grammar rules we're taught at school. So we are going to talk about how to kind of change that and also give examples of what that kind of writing looks like. Other things is that we will discuss are we will review examples. Like I said, these are examples of the 100,000 essays that I've reviewed, really standout ones that just, I don't know, you know, every now and then in admissions, you read an essay and it just like, it either makes you cry, it makes you think, it makes you really feel for the student. And those are the essays that are going to really be the ones that I think kind of change an admissions person's perspective as to yes or no about that student. So we're going to take a look at some of those and kind of discuss what are some highlights of those essays that stand out to us, okay? Other things, we're going to talk about tips that are specific to you guys, especially for those that are first gen on this call. We'll talk about how to start your essays. And at the end, we have a Q&A. So if some of you are rising seniors and you're writing your essays right now and you're like, oh my gosh, can I just run this topic by you? Yes, you can during our Q&A. You could also bring up other questions that come to mind. All right. I would love to, if I could just see everyone give a thumbs up, but I know we can't. But hopefully you guys are with me with all of this. I talk pretty fast, so I apologize if anyone needs me to talk slower. Do let your other co-hosts know, and they can nudge me to slow down a little bit. But otherwise, I'm going to try to fit a lot of material in here. All right. So how to think about writing an essay. The first thing we even think about when we think about writing an essay or any essay is going to be our audience. And a big thing that college admissions is looking for when they're trying to choose students is fit. We want to see how is this student going to fit in our diverse, really, you know, wonderful, contributing, you know, community that we have on campus. So they really want to understand what is there unique about you beyond your application, right? Which would be like your transcript, your teacher recs, your activity list. You know, the essays are the place where beyond kind of those like more metric points, we get a real sense of who you are and what kind of personality you're going to bring to campus. And I've met a lot of personalities. So very strong personalities, you know, some personalities that are still budding, etc. We want a mix of everything. So we're going to kind of talk about how do colleges kind of think about fit and why is that important? Okay, so let's put ourselves in the mind of the universities. Fit is important to universities because they are trying to do something called college retention. So college retention refers to the number of students who return for their sophomore year. So they want students that are going to be able to handle the rigor, to feel really like a part of the campus, enjoy being there, so that beyond their freshman year, they come back and they actually finish their degree in, you know, 4 years, ideally, if not upwards of 6 years or so. That's really important because if we look at data today, 1 in 4 first-year students will not make it back for their sophomore year. That's really high. It's much lower if we're looking at kind of like higher ranked top tier universities. I recommend when you guys make your college list that you guys, when you go to Big Future, you could type Big Future plus the school name, that you guys are looking at what that retention rate is, because you really want to attend a school where you're seeing students are returning. Because if they are not returning for the next year, there might be some red flags there about like some issues that are going on with the university. So side note, look for that. Also side note, That's also why, college fit, which is determined a bit by essays, is so important to schools. We want to make sure that if you're attending our school, you are going to be able to make it work for you. The other thing is college yield rate. So we want to see, the percentage of the students who are accepted to the school. We want to then see that you guys are then accepting our offer. So it kind of goes both ways. I know right now you guys are in the process where you're more kind of thinking like, oh, I hope that a school will accept me. But it kind of goes both ways, right? Like if you're a standout student, you might have many schools give you acceptances. So colleges are also kind of vying for you to say yes and commit to their school. And they can get a sense of your commitment to their school through the essays. One of the really popular essay prompts you guys will see over and over again, to the point where it'll just like to your mind, is why us? Why do you want to come to Boston College? Why do you want to come to UT Austin? They are really looking for you to have performed your research and to speak very specifically as to like where you fit in and how that school will align with your goals. So it's really important that all of you are considering fit when you're writing your essays, but even before that, when you're creating your list. Every school on your list needs to be a school you'd want to go to. Otherwise, you're wasting your time applying there. I get students sometimes, they're like, hey, Miss Liepin or Miss Jennifer, or whatever you want to call me. I want to apply to 20 schools or more than 20 schools. If you're applying to more than 20 schools, you probably have like 5 schools or maybe more schools that you don't even really want to go to. And if you got into, you really wouldn't be that excited about, you may not commit to. So really, really like preen your list to make sure the schools on there are ones you know about and are ones you would want to commit to and be excited to go to, okay? And that will be important because when you write your essays, if you don't feel really like stellar about the school that you're writing an essay for, it will be clear in your essay. It will not be something the admissions committee will be impressed by. All right. Other things, going backwards a little bit, right? We were just talking about retention rate, graduation rate. So they measure this a lot of times over like, how many students over a 6-year period, because they understand some students might leave for a gap year or whatever, actually graduate. So that number is 60%, which is pretty low. So y'all should be a little scared. The graduation rate's much higher, luckily at highly selective schools. So that's again, like, me as someone that works at USC Bovard Scholars, our job at that particular CBO is to try to encourage students to apply and get accepted to highly selective schools because their graduation rates are much higher. They're like, say like 95%, right? Or maybe even higher than that. Versus there are some schools out there that are like private for-profit universities where if you look at what the graduation rates are, they're super low. So you want to make sure that number is something you're considering as you go. But fit's also important because, beyond the essays, right, it's going to determine everything about your college admissions process and whether it's worth it to you. All right. So fit should be important to you because you will be happy at the school. You'll have a sense of belonging, which is like a huge factor in terms of whether you actually graduate from a school. You'll, hopefully then engage in meaningful learning, research, internship experiences, and find your path, right? The whole goal of college is, that you gain the skills and knowledge you need to be successful post-college, but that you also get a direction as to where you want to go, right? Like many people are going to change majors, and that's coming because of the experience you're getting in school as you like discover new facets of life that you're interested in. So all of that there. Okay. So last thing I'm going to say about fit, and then I promise I will talk about essays, is just really make sure that you're looking at schools that you love, not just name brand schools. I personally, when I applied to college, mostly just looked at schools around Pennsylvania. I was from like kind of a rural part of Pennsylvania. And I was like, what's California? Okay, no, I knew what California was, but like it totally intimidated me to apply to anywhere rather than, I think I went as far as applying to like Rhode Island. That was as far as I went. But if I were to do it all over again, I think I would have probably put a bunch of liberal arts schools on there. I would have applied to like Wesleyan, Wellesley, Barnard. I also probably would have applied to some really interesting schools like UT Austin, so on and so forth. Yale has such a beautiful campus. Would have never thought to do that in high school. Now I would have applied there. Not that I'm not happy with Penn. I had a great time at Penn. However, I think it's really important to not just pick the school names that you've heard in, like, say, a movie like Legally Blonde, right? They're still good schools, but we need to, like, look out everywhere. And really find and research those schools that will support your interests, because if you do, your essays are going to be much easier to write. All right. Okay. Oh, finally, we're getting to the essays part. So essays, how do they work? How do they help determine fit? All right. So first off, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, if you're wild about a school, it'll be clear in your essay. You'll feel like this person right here in the picture. She looks confident. She's happy where she is, right? I've seen many students, because I also help students transfer schools, apply to schools they thought were their dream school, and then they get there. And, like, for example, I get a lot of kids that transfer out of Berkeley, and Berkeley is a fantastic school. Many people love it, but for them, sometimes they get students, they're just saying, you know, the classes are too big, they're overcrowded. I don't even get to choose the class I want until, like, my senior year, because my major is super crowded. So, you know, it's really good to kind of look ahead at, like, what are the different obstacles you might face at a school before you apply there and then eventually go there. Because transferring means you have to go through the application process all over again. And there are some schools, if we say like Harvard, there are a few Ivies where, like, they almost accept like 0 transfers a year. So your chances sometimes with transfer are going to go way down. So let's be super smart about that fit. All right. And also, it'll be clear in your essays. Like, I just had a student write an essay about UT Austin. I just mentioned that earlier. And the first time he wrote his essay, I think UT Austin, he wants to go to the business school there. I think he just picked it because it was on, like, a list. And then I read his essays and I was like, there are 2 essays on here that are kind of why UT Austin essays. And I got no sense of it. And I told him, like, if I got that essay, I would have straight up rejected him, because it was a very bland essay. It didn't speak to UT Austin. It showed me, like, very little effort on his part that he wanted to go to that school and therefore done the research. So anytime you get a Y essay, I should be able to, like, really be able to pick little things out of it as to, like, why you have to go there. You're literally writing a persuasive essay to convince me as the adcom that I need to have you go there, because your life will be changed if you go to that school. If I don't feel that in your essay, you're not doing the work, okay? So I recommend keeping that in mind, and also checking in, you know, if your friends, family, if you're working for CBO, adults, etc., that can give you kind of feedback as to whether you're really achieving that sense of, like, persuasion when you write those Y essays, okay? All right, why else are essays important? They're actually more important than ever, considering that a lot of schools are now test optional. You know, they aren't getting your test scores. So those metrics, like, it used to be back in the day that, like, SAT and your transcript almost accounted for, like, 2/3 of, like, the admissions decision process, right? So with test optional, right, that took, like, a huge chunk out of, like, the criteria that decide whether you're going to be accepted. So especially for students that are applying test optional, and even if you aren't, you know, essays just have really elevated in terms of, like, their place in the holistic admissions process. So as a result, you guys, your generation, is really going to have to put more effort than ever to really establish yourself with these essays. You also see there's, like, an article that I think recently came out in the Wall Street Journal that the essay prompts are getting kind of wild and creative. So they're really, these universities, trying to stretch you to get a full sense of who you are. So it's very important that you stand up for that, to that, and really write phenomenal essays. All right. They also, of course, can help, right? Like, if you are like me and you went to a school where the average AP score was at 2, or there just weren't many AP classes offered, right? So we're up against these students that are heavy hitters with those scores. The good thing is colleges get something called a school profile. So they would know if I were applying for my school that I just didn't have the opportunities to do much with my APs. But, you know, at the same time, even though they have that level of understanding, it is wonderful if I can kind of, you know, surpass other students in another element, which in my case was the essays. And just, you know, be aware of, like, you know, as you're going through these, We could see, for example, at the UCs, the different schools are going to assign different amounts of essays, and some of that kind of relates that number to like how important the essays are. The UCs, for example, assign 4 essays, which is crazy. That's a lot for especially a state school. So it just shows you it's super important there. You'll see some schools like Columbia or Yale, where there's just a lot of essays. Chicago has an extremely long essay. So those are schools that are kind of indicating to you that they really care about those responses. So you got to take your time and really be thoughtful with those. All right. So yeah, I figured I'll talk a second about, for myself, I went to Penn. If you looked at my scores, especially today in the competitive admissions market that we're in, you would be like, oh, wow, how did she get in? This is very weird. I went to a school that was primarily white, and Penn's funny because a lot of these Ivies, they're like 30% Asian. And I had students, when they heard that I got into Penn, tell me that I got in because I was Asian, which was like crazy because like being Asian isn't going to help you with an Ivy. But I knew the reality, it wasn't like an ethnic thing. It was because I really showed my caliber in my essays. So I'm going to get into it a little bit more of my story about what I wrote about. But I'm just letting you guys know, I see it over and over again that the essays get students into schools. I had a student 2 years ago who applied to Columbia test optional. Her SAT score was like a 1250, but we didn't sort it. Despite whatever, background she had, she went to like an underserved high school, didn't have a lot of opportunities for AP classes or other things like that. But because of her essays and a very strong activity list, she got into Columbia despite a 1250 SAT. I've seen the same with students, that have had maybe like a 1300 and gotten into Harvard, and a lot of those students are getting in, even if they don't have maybe some of the stronger metrics, they're getting in because they have a strong personal story to convey and a real sense of direction. And that's something you can convey in the essays. All right, the essays. I think this is good to talk about. How does it make you feel? This is exactly students. They're like, oh no. Even when they're good writers, I think it's super intimidating because you guys are all a little freaked out about like, what if I don't get into a school? What is going to happen to me? First off, let's not worry about that right now, right? We've got plenty of time in the spring to worry about like, am I going to get into a school? For now, we've just got to like have a healthy mindset for this. So let's just take it back a step from like the like horror of writing these essays and what they mean for like your forever future, and talk more about what it should make you feel. I feel like the essays are kind of like a cake. They're kind of like, hey, first gen students, here's this opportunity for you guys to really tell your story and like stand out amongst some of the peers that you're up against that have more resources, right? Like if we look at other countries, a lot of students are purely just getting into those schools based off of scores, right? Versus the US, we believe in holistic admissions, where we're considering all these different attributes because we want to make sure we're promoting fairness and equity, right, in terms of the admissions process. So the essays are there to support you. They're actually kind of like the golden ticket from like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory for you guys to really kind of impress the admissions committee and let them know like maybe my metrics aren't that high. However, consider these circumstances that I've been really resilient and made it through, right? So this is like, these are a good thing. See the essays as something that's like a wonderful thing for you to be able to share who you are. I have students that, are mad scientists. I have students that integrate music into every aspect of their life. I have one student that's just done really phenomenal activism work and spoke at the White House on behalf of Indigenous people last year. So, it's your time to kind of share those really important aspects. Think about what makes you, right? We're all these different elements, colors, everything. So, it's trying to kind of encapsulate all that in one place. And I recommend that even like before you guys start your Common App essay, that you try to think about if there's an example that really kind of speaks to who you are. So even like before you read the prompts, I know this is a little backwards, think about what is the story you want to tell. Because the good thing is with the Common App prompts, if we look at number 7, there's one that share an essay on any topic of your choice. So you're not limited right? These 6 prompts are there just to kind of help you brainstorm and inspire you. You can write an essay on anything as long as it's still about you. So I think it's good to think about what's the story you want to tell first, and then come over here, see if it fits one of these, if you want to use one of the prompts. Otherwise, use 7. 7's totally underutilized. All right. So like I said, I'm not going to talk too long about my essays because you guys are going to be like, wow, her ego is crazy. But I'll just go through it really quickly. So underrepresented student, I wrote 2 really kind of major essays that I used a lot of places. And I think my first, and I don't have it saved, I wish I did. My personal statement was a lot about my life. And I think it's important to kind of discuss because I came from a pretty strange, torrid background. My essay actually made my English teacher cry when I gave it to him because my background was pretty rough. So I grew up underserved, right, on food stamps, right, all of these things, they're not super common, but you know, it was definitely, I had a stressful lifestyle because my parents, my mom was actually, she immigrated from Japan and married my dad. They kind of had maybe kind of a green card-ish marriage. My dad was actually in the closet, you know, he was like a homosexual that during that time was trying to find a way to normalize himself, especially because he had a military father. So he married my mom, who spoke very little English, and they had a very terrible marriage. Naturally, because you know he was married to someone that was not the gender he was in love with, and as a result, there were a lot of affairs. There was a divorce. You know, when my mom was left to try to support us, like not long after they divorced, she had a nervous breakdown. My brother and I ended up in foster care. When we got out of foster care, my mom, in order to make ends meet, was working a lot of jobs. She actually took the sex work. And I mean, it gets crazier after that. Like I have 2 step siblings that passed because of drug addictions. Like my childhood was like crazy. And I get a lot of students that have really challenging things that they've had to go through, and they don't feel comfortable writing about it in their essays. And I think that's like perfectly fine, right? Like I think you guys only should write in your essays what you're comfortable talking about. However, on the other hand, I also get the other side of students that say, you know, if I write about these like challenges in my life, am I writing a sob story? And is that cliche? And it's like, no, it's not, right? Like that's your story. Those are your circumstances. Like colleges need to know what you had to deal with and how you were still able to achieve all of these things with all of these crazy obstacles and elements and distractions going on in your life, right? Like, I feel like at Penn, if they didn't understand all of the stuff that was happening in my background, they would not have seen how important it was that I submitted like a very strong activity list and that I submitted, you know, really wonderful essays and a pretty good transcript, right? Like those were heavy deciding factors. If I didn't have that essay, I don't think I'd have gotten in there. My other essay was more of my lighter creative essay, and it had a lot to do, still kind of low income elements in the sense that growing up in rural Pennsylvania, there wasn't a lot to do. Like the internet was like meh back then, you know, we didn't have smartphones. So my friends and I came up with like really weird pranks and games to play to entertain ourselves because we were all really poor. We live next to the Tasty Cake Factory where they make snack cakes. And we would literally like push each other and climb on each other to dump the other person into the dumpster. And then we'd, you know, take all the expired cakes out and come up with like all sorts of weird games. Like we'd write messages in cakes. We lived by a big hill where we'd like drive our car down the hill and throw the cakes at the sign and see who could get the most points by hitting as many signs. You know, it was just it was a really interesting essay because I think very few people are going to choose to write about vandalism. And I think it was a good essay because it showed kind of like a creative aspect, like the fact that like I was kind of a leader with coming up with these different weird ways to spend time. But like, you know, that in inviting me to Penn's class, right, when we're kind of going back to the idea of fit, where did I fit? I fit as a student that was going to go there, that was underserved, that was going to bring a lot of interesting perspectives because of my family history, but was also going to bring a lot of creativity with me and hopefully, you know, create a fun environment for my peers, right? So like you kind of want to think of like, when admissions is hearing your essays, how are they taking the information you're providing them and putting them together into their mind to understand what kind of person you're going to be on campus? All right. All right. So that's all I have about these essays. I would share them with you, but they are gone. They've disappeared into the ether. Save your essays, everyone. Put them on like a flash drive or cloud. You want to see them later. All right, I was going to ask for people to volunteer, be readers, but I think it's a little hard with so much heavy attendance. So maybe I'll see, Bhavya, are you up to read some essays? Are you cool with that?
Yeah, for sure.
All right, cool. All right, we're going to listen to her lovely voice. So we're going to keep going. All right, so what I'm going to do next is showcase just little excerpts from some really like outstanding essays I had, and then we're going to discuss them a little bit and kind of pull out some key points that I want you guys to kind of have in mind as we go through these. So this is one of my students. He was accepted to Harvard regular decision. He didn't apply ED there because he literally was like, I don't know, I can't choose schools. So, that's why we're seeing the RD there. All right, so Bhavya, if you don't mind going ahead, just let's go through it, read that paragraph for us.
Yeah, I never expected that the most mundane experience, a 2.5 hour drive to my brother's college, would kick off the worst and then best thing to happen to me. My parents had been mysterious all week and no explanation was given as to why we were visiting my brother. As we began the 2.5 hour drive to his college, I felt something large on the horizon. The look of perplexity lining my brother's face, meaning is that the car mirrored mine, until it sunk as my dad explained that the house that I grew up in, having Nerf gun wars with my cousins, making up games to play with my brother, was being foreclosed on.
And one more, please.
All right. The only blessing at the time was that I was too busy with a heavy AP course load and nonstop extracurricular schedule to lament. My despair had to be segmented into the short blocks of hours I sandwiched between packing boxes and studying for exams. It would not be until we paced the bottom floor of our now empty
right
house.
There. Sorry, I'm gonna stop you right there because I think that's enough. And I'm like, oh my gosh, where's the time going? Right. Anyway, so I think this is a really good example of an essay where students, like, again, you guys are going to come to me and be like, but Jennifer, my story isn't as extreme as yours. I'm like, that's good. Like, no one should have my story, right? That's not for everyone. But like, the idea is like, we all have struggles. Like in this case, the student wrote about a foreclosure, and this was like a major impactful thing in his life. So like, don't feel like your story has to be like really extreme for it to be something that's going to be meaningful in terms of like how it changes the admissions committee's perspective, right? This is about a foreclosure. It's probably, I don't want to rate this on a spectrum, right? But it's not the most extreme. So do tell your stories, even if you're worried they're not as like drastic as maybe someone else's. That's not the point, okay? So moving on, and we're gonna just kind of skip through these. I will give you guys access to the whole essays later so you guys can read them, so don't worry about it. We're going to skip the discussion as well because, too many people, it will get crazy. But I suggest to you guys, when you guys go into your mentorship meetings later, you guys can totally, discuss what you learned today at this as well as other sessions. Feel free to have that free flow later. All right. So we went through this right earlier, so we're going to keep going. All right. So I would love you, Bhavya, to go ahead and start this next essay reading.
All right, should I start from during my first week?
Start at recipe. Believe it or not, that is part of this essay.
Oh, okay. All right. Recipe for a boogeyman. 1, mix a human silhouette and putrid stench. 2, sprinkle hunger and vice. 3, neglect it, fear it. 4, bake it and let it rise. Silhouette and stench. During my first week in the United States, I met a blonde 2-year-old girl. At 4 years old, I noticed that my skin was the color of her silhouette on a sandy Florida beach. Her eyes were the blue sky, while mine were the brown silt pooled around her feet. Her golden hair reflected light, my charcoal hair drained color from the swaying palm trees. Her family members all shared in those mesmerizing features along with one more. They smelled like berries. Despite employing my father, he never shared their pleasant fragrance.
So you can already see, just looking at the top of this essay, if you guys are like, my essay's cliche, like you can literally write about anything, and it's all about the way you tell it, right? We're going to go into the story a little bit more, but like It's already kind of unconventional, and that's good. Unconventional is fine. You guys, this is your essay. You can write it however you want. I had one student who, she got into like almost every school she applied to. She's from Africa, and her like dialect, right? Like she had used a lot of slang in her essay, and she was like, oh, what should I edit it out? And I was like, no, like that's your voice. You know, so if you use a lot of slang in real life, like please keep it in there so they can hear your voice. And feel free that you can kind of have these less traditional elements to it. So keep that in mind. I think, you know, if you guys Google, what is there? There's like the Domino's pizza essay, there's a Costco essay, where you like look at those essays and you're like, these essays are like really not about anything like major, but it's how they're told. You know, so if you haven't, just write that down now, look up the Costco and Domino's pizza essays, just to get a sense of like different ways to go about writing essays. All right, so we're going to keep going, but like the whole idea is this student basically wrote an essay about the like this kind of maybe semi-fictional boogeyman that really had to do with how he felt as like a Latino male, you know, of how he's perceived by others. So in the end, he's kind of talking about later on in the essay, no matter what he does, he ended up becoming like a top Boy Scout and like was like waving the flag at like some major Boy Scout event, right? Super American. But no matter how much he could do, some people are always going to view him, right, as like this monster, right? Of like, oh, the Latino men are coming into our country, they're bringing crime, right? They're bringing drugs, right? Literally the president said. So that's what I'm saying. Like the way he wrote it was just, it was shocking. The first time I read this essay, I got like chills because as much as the topic was really important, the way he delivered it, I think was equally also important to kind of convey how he truly felt about his circumstances. So keep that in mind. You don't have to write a 5-paragraph, really traditional essay. It can be out there. All right, let's go on. So let's do one more reading. Bhavya, go ahead, read that little excerpt.
All right. Mimi's, my mother announces through my family's household, as nightfall encapsulates the underprivileged yet safe rural colonia we live in within the outskirts of El Paso, Texas. Mimi signifies the end of the day when all goes quiet and all one can hear is the soft tumbling of the winds. While Mimi serves as an indication of a new forthcoming day within our household, to the Cuban refugees migrating to the United States, the world falls flat. Within the timeline of these immigrants, no future day is assured. No night is assumed to be peaceful. Mimi signifies nothing to refugees whose restless nights filled with constant worries of shelter, food, and clothing compromise any inner rest.
Okay, so this is a more traditional essay. So, you know, you can go either way. I think the key thing, like I said, I'm going to put all these essays up for you guys to read, is that it really it's genuine and it comes from the heart. Like this student ended up writing about even himself as an underserved student in like a distant barrio of El Paso. He still, with what limited resources he had with his church, ended up creating a shelter, a safe harbor for Cuban refugees as they crossed over into the United States to have a few nights to spend before they were then able to access other resources and make their way into the country. So, keep in mind, all of these things are wonderful, so hopefully you guys will find the topic that really you feel represents who you are, to the admissions committee, because this is the one place you get to do it. You don't get to do it anywhere else in your application. Other suggestions I have for you, let your freak flag fly. I'm all about that. I love it. It's interesting. I put in here, admissions officers read hundreds of essays a season, sometimes across a career, thousands. In my case, I've read 100,000 essays. I've read every essay, but literally I haven't, because I still am constantly smacked in the face as I come across something really interesting. Something really genuine, something that shows me you're really informed. So it's important that you guys find a way to kind of establish your unique voice, while of course at the same time doing your research for essays that require it. Okay. Other things. I've really, like I said, seen every kind of essay. I read one essay though, I feel like I've seen everything. And then I recently read an essay last year from one of my students that was about how she would spend for a month or two every night in the woods around 11 p.m. in the dark with no lights. as a way of like breaking a norm for one of her classes. And it was like super scary. But as for someone that wanted to study environmental science, it was also a really revealing thing for her as she got to experience true nature minus all the distractions of noise and light pollution. So like it could be little moments like that that end up being your Common App essay. And she got into her dream school. I had another student that wrote about upheaval, moving to Florida, low income student. The mom took everything they owned and sold it to buy like a really falling apart horse farm on her last dream. And it was a pretty harrowing story about how she had to regularly on like rainstorms kind of like battle the elements to get these horses inside. And it was just a really rough 2 years for her. Okay, what else to do? If you're not a rising senior yet, so if you're a rising senior, you could maybe still take advantage of this, less so. For younger students though, now's the time if you're like, well, I'm not writing essays yet. Well, guess what? You guys, now's the time for you to look into CBOs. So CBOs are community-based organizations, and they support students generally that are low income, underrepresented, and they give you free college admission services. So college admissions is expensive. I'm going to be real with you guys. College admissions, like counselors charge like $100,000 to $400, sorry, $100 to $400 an hour, which is crazy. So some people are literally getting that level of resource as they work through their applications. You guys can get this for free, but you need to take the time to research the CBOs. You can like literally look up like college admissions CBO, enter your state, and you'll probably find a list of organizations. But you can also look at coalitionforcollegeaccess.org in order to find more of those. And yeah, like I said earlier, that's where I work. I work at USC Bovard Scholars. We accept 120 scholars into our program every year. And we actually, it's all expenses paid for. We fly you out to USC for 3 weeks. You do a full-time curriculum, bunch of really fun, cool activities, career building, as well as like work site visits to like major companies. It's wonderful. And then when you leave the program then covers for you to meet with a college admissions counselor every week to help you with literally everything of your applications, you know? So if you haven't looked into this, please do, because those programs are amazing and they're meant to help you take advantage of them. Okay. So want to see more examples. So guys, just as much as you might procrastinate about things, so do I. I opened this website domain called antiadmissions.com a while ago because I love college admissions. I'm obsessed about it, but I also kind of hate it because it's kind of terrible, right? There is bias and a lot of other issues related to it. So I created anti-admissions college admissions. And I'm going to take all of the essays that I mentioned today, plus probably like a dozen more, and I'll put them on the site. They're all generally from first-gen students. So they can give you a sense of like different ideas or ways of writing that you guys might want to use. The site is under construction, but probably in the next 2 days, everything will be up there. So you guys can really get, you know, dig into the resources there. Beyond the essays, I'll have a bunch of other stuff on there too. So you can see, I'll put all of that in. I'll put some fun pictures in, right? Oogie Boogie from The Night Before Christmas, one of my favorite movies, love it. I will try to entertain you guys with lots of things on the website. Yep, so there it is. And there'll be more resources. I'm gonna put up there pretty much like all of the stuff I use with my students that I, you know, with my private companies charge too much for. So that way you guys could just have it for free, because I think, you know, open source equity is super important. So all of that will be up for you guys in the next couple of weeks. So you can go ahead and bookmark that site and visit it in 2 weeks, and I'll have a lot of stuff on there for you. All right, essay takeaways. What should you do? You should start early. If you have not written your Common App essay yet, and you're a rising senior, you need to write it now. Oh my gosh, you guys all have really busy senior years, tons of APs, leadership positions of your extracurriculars. If you have not written your Common App essay, that means you're gonna have, if you're applying to 15 schools, and each school maybe, let's say average has 3 supplements, you're gonna have 45 essays to write. Some of those essays will repeat, right? And you can modify and reuse things, but that's still a lot of essays. So you need to start writing if you have not started writing yet. Oh my goodness. Okay, other things. Oh, if you're younger, when should you start? You should start writing these essays like June. As soon as school's out, that's your time to start, okay? Write from a place of passion. I get students all the time that look at other people's essays and then they write an essay that's just like the other person's essay, except they can't actually write it because it's not actually their voice and they waste all their time on it. Like, read the other essays for inspiration, but please tell your own story from your own point of view. Be memorable, be genuine. There are a bunch of cliche essays out there. I'm gonna post something about what cliches we should be considering, so you guys can consider that as well as you choose your topics. Okay, so going through, quick plug-in. I work with a lot of students with their NGOs. I'm an advisor for first gen support. I'm just gonna throw this out there in case any of you are interested in climate change. One of my students is putting on, it's called the Covalescent Global X Icebreaker 3-day webinar series. So if you're interested, I'll put a link in the chat for that, okay? All right, so we are at Q&A. So I'm gonna open it up. Bhavya, can you let everyone know how this works?
Yes, so for the Q&A, I mentioned in the beginning that you can direct any messages to me, and I collected a few questions, which I'll just read out and you can answer them. All right, so for the first question, something that stuck out to me was, what would you say to students who believe college admissions process makes them feel the need to achieve everything, know everything, and have their life figured out before submitting college apps or their essays?
Yeah, I get that. Oh my gosh. I would say you don't need to know everything. I think considering how many, right, nearly like half of students are going to change majors when you get to school, and then another half are going to graduate from school and do nothing with their major. You don't need to know that now. You just need a sense of direction, right? Of something you're going to be interested in that you want to explore. So don't feel like you have to know. A lot of students actually apply undeclared, and applying undeclared, depending on the school, can actually increase your admissions rates, in lieu of applying for an impacted major, which is like a super popular major. So you don't need to know. What was the second part of that question?
The second part was about having or being able to know everything before they even submit their college apps.
Oh yeah. So you don't need to know everything. Oh, and don't worry too much. The big thing is just finding a school that has like the right resources and environment to ensure you're going to graduate, which is like the retention rates and like the programs and stuff that you'll research along the way. Worry less about your major, because if you're applying to a highly selective school, most likely they do almost every major really well, and you'll have the ability to explore.
All right, and for the next question, I put two questions together. So students were asking if they should write about any struggle or something tragic, because sometimes counselors may deem it as either too sad or it will just seem as if it was a normal struggle. So how would you say they phrase it and into their essay?
Yeah, I see it all the time. I mean, considering a huge chunk of the students I work with are underserved, I'm seeing a lot of struggles in essays. And guess what? Those students are just getting into the Ivies like there's no tomorrow. So there's definitely no points taken off for you guys choosing to do something like that. I think you really should tell your authentic essay. I do say though, for example, there's a UC that's like, what is the greatest, I don't know, obstacle that you've encountered in your life? How did you overcome it? Right? If you're going to write your greatest obstacle is like, I don't know, a really hard exam in your APCS class, right? Comparative to some of other people's really hard obstacles, you may just choose not to write for that essay because your obstacle, I can understand, maybe doesn't play as well as some of the other things that, the admissions readers are going to read. But at the same time, I wouldn't downplay the fact that we all have our own circumstances and our obstacles are going to be different because of that.
All right. Next question was detailing how many drafts someone should have and how many prompts of the college, the Common App that they should write down.
Oh my gosh, please don't write more than 2 versions of the Common App. Otherwise you will procrastinate and never get to your supplementals. So I usually recommend really taking your time, brainstorming, feeling really firm about the essay you're going to choose initially for your Common App, writing it. And then if you have second thoughts, you can write a second one. If you're doing more than that, you just haven't really done the brainstorming well enough, right? It really should stand out what your topic is. So yeah, just 2 at the most. In terms of revisions, it's going to vary. I see some students write 3 drafts, some write 8 drafts. So it really depends how much work you need. But if you are, working with a really good English teacher or a CBO, just keep asking them. They want the best for you. They're going to be okay if you keep submitting drafts to them, but like submit good drafts, right? Where you've actually taken their edits into mind with each revision.
All right. And next question, I combined a few of them together. We're detailing about how volunteer hours or extracurriculars will affect your essays or chances when applying to colleges. Like if you have less volunteer hours or less extracurriculars and more like stuff you do in the house, how would that kind of play in?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so I have some students that, have like a lot of household responsibilities, especially during COVID. Many had to like take care of their siblings or maybe like an ill relative or, had to get a job, to help support the family. So, put that in there, right? Like you do get to, in addition to like your list of what you're doing, put in how many hours, of course, that you're doing each activity for. So like, for example, I had a student that was probably working like 20 hours a week during their school year to support their family when their father lost their job and, didn't have a lot of time for a ton of extracurriculars. And college admissions committees are going to see that and factor that into the evaluation. So you should focus less on necessarily quantity of things you're submitting and more on the quality. So, it's all about really kind of showing your passion, your impact, etc. And that could come across fewer things that you're doing and committing a lot of time towards, if that makes sense. As for service hours, like, please don't feel like you're like, I get some students that are like, I hit 100 hours of service every year, like, woo. And that's great. Like, you should keep track of that, but it shouldn't be the only objective. Like, you should be doing the service because you're genuinely committed to the kind of service you're doing. That's more important than the quantity.
All right. Next question, how can I write an essay that doesn't focus a lot on my family and focus more on me, even though most of my background is related to like anything that happened with my family and not exactly like what happened directly to me?
Yeah, that's tough. I get it. I think the admissions committee folks like to laugh that like, every now and then someone will write about like my greatest mentor is my grandma, and then they write an essay about the grandma and they're like, wow, I would have met your grandma, but I know nothing about you from this essay. So that's kind of like the thought you should have in mind. Have I just written about my grandma and gotten her into Princeton? So I think on the other hand, though, I had a student last year who had to really kind of dig backwards into his circumstances to kind of explain his community. And, at the end of it, the way he told the essay, even though it involved a lot of talking about like his mother and his father and everyone around him, the way he talked about it and the way he kind of reflected on his feelings throughout the different experiences allowed me to still really get a sense of who he is while still putting in all of those informational bits about circumstances. So I hope that makes sense, but you can hit me up after this if you get confused with that.
Perfect. Next was, what are the best ways to brainstorm your own ideas for the essays to be meaningful?
Oh yeah, College Essay Guy, if you guys haven't seen him, Google him. He's amazing. He actually has some really great exercises that are out there for brainstorming. So because we only have like 5 minutes left, I'm going to say Google College Essay Guy brainstorming, and you guys will find tons of really wonderful ideas there.
All right, perfect. And lastly, I was going to ask, what should we add in the additional information section for the Common App?
Yeah, so that's important. That's another one. If you look up College Essay Guy, additional information, he does a really thorough job explaining that. Yeah, thank you, Bhavya. So for that, it's really important that it's not like, you don't have to fill that out. It's optional, right? So the only stuff that should show up in there is something that just couldn't make the rest of your application. I see sometimes where students at the Common App where you get 150 characters to describe in a description of an activity. They just feel like they don't really capture that well enough. So they might add an addendum to explain the activity more. They might add like excerpts from like a research paper that they did, like an abstract from a research paper, perhaps. Outstanding circumstances that came up. I literally had a student use that section because there was sexual harassment from a teacher at her school, and it really led to her grades that were all A's to suddenly drop in the one class she was harassed in. And it was like very important that she explained that, and there's nowhere else in the application for her to do so. So like anything like that, that's kind of exceptional, where they need to know something that happened and you have nowhere else to put it, put that in that section.
All right, perfect. So I think we have time enough to take one more question. I did see a lot of people discuss about adding or like relating their major and career interests within their essays, or kind of mentioning either their AP scores or their academic rigor. What would you say about that?
Yeah, don't force it. Like the great thing is we have your transcript. So I already know, I already got your AP scores. I got your transcript. I see the record there. So please don't push that into your essay unless it's an integral part of your essay. Otherwise, I see that and I think redundant. So that's not a good word in my mind.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much, Jennifer. If you could you please drop in your contact information for the students to reach out to you and any other resources? And before we actually leave, I would like it if everyone could turn on their camera so I can take a few pictures to be able to post later and send around. So that would be really great. And it's just for the pictures, just for like the few minutes, and you can turn it off immediately. And also, everyone make sure to fill out the Zoom feedback form and then another feedback form, which will be sent via email to be able to enter into our raffle to win up to 20K worth of prizes. All right, perfect.
Oh, and I'll throw that really quick, guys. I am offering some college application reviews as part of the raffle. So woo, get your, raffle tickets in there, because I will literally, with that, have you send a full application to me. So I will give you feedback on all the essays you'd be submitting, your activity list, every element of that. So use it. That would be a really wonderful thing for you guys to enjoy. Oh, the climate change link is what I mentioned earlier. I was just doing a little promotion for one of my students that's putting together like a climate change conference. So yay. All right.
All right.
Lovely meeting you guys. Have a good rest of your conference.
Perfect. Let me just take a few pictures. Sorry, it's going to take a while. Feel free to take pictures yourself too and post on social media and tag First Gen Support. We'll be reposting any stories and posts that you guys have. Let's see. And thank you so much for attending today. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for being here. All right, perfect. Okay, one last picture and then I'll let you guys leave. I'm sorry about that. Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Please fill out the feedback forms and there will be a recording sent out soon. Thank you.
Is there a way we could contact her?
Yes, I believe she dropped down her information within the chat. I can also send out her email. I have one right here.
Thank you.
For sure. There you go. The feedback form, the Zoom one should pop up automatically. I'll check in on that, but the other feedback form is scheduled to come around midday EST, so you will see it there. Or at the end of the day too. And there's no raffle link. It's just once you fill out the feedback form, you'll automatically be submitted into the raffle.